Haxan, released in 1922 and directed by Benjamin Christensen, is a silent film that blends documentary-style lecturing with dramatised reenactments to explore how people in the Middle Ages understood witchcraft and how fear and superstition shaped their beliefs historically. It stands as one of the earliest silent films to blend documentary, dramatisation and essay-style commentary. As silent films go, it has a fairly unique structural approach, foregoing a simple narrative plotline in favour of short, standalone stories that are connected together by a narrator. In this way, it takes the audience on a journey, as a teacher would, through the history of witchcraft from the Middle Ages to what would then be present day. But this isn't the only significant factor of the film. The element that attracted audiences at first, and still attracts them today, is the exceptional visuals, especially the depiction of devils, demons, and the witch's Sabbath. The director allegedly spent 2 years researching witchcraft before creating the film, apparent when you consider the richness of the visual details. As a result, this is another example of a film that has had a huge cultural influence in the history of cinema, having inspired notable directors such as Guillermo del Toro, Lars von Trier, David Lynch, and more recently Robert Eggers with his folk horror films especially. So its cultural significance is not in question, but how is the film itself for contemporary audiences to experience? That's where the more interesting aspect of the discussion lies. To start off, I was not a big fan of the first 2 acts of the film. Visually, it was interesting enough, and depending on what version you were watching, the score can be very serviceable or atmospheric, but it lacked a hook for me. The film is divided into 7 acts, and the first one serves as an illustrated lecture, educating the audience about the historical and cultural framework for understanding witchcraft, through medieval cosmology, historical artifacts, and how natural events were interpreted through magical or religious explanations. The following acts function as reenactments of the world of witchcraft beliefs, with set pieces of varying length in different times and settings, but this lack of an initial narrative hook made those first 35 minutes quite difficult to sit through. It also didn't help that the following set piece took a while to get going, with Maria the Weaver. But when it does get going, when they start accusing her of being a witch after a woman's husband gets sick, that's when the film started to grab my attention, and kept it for nearly the entirety of the rest of the runtime. This is when most of the exciting visuals come into play, when the director starts to play with the idea of false accusations and the moral and religious implications that come with it in that time period. He also starts playing with some very interesting themes through some fairly compelling narratives, displaying 1 or 2 surprisingly layered characters for a silent film. This is exactly what I want in a silent film, but it only starts about 35 minutes into the film. This connects to an overarching criticism I have for films, the runtime. Personally, I believe if films have an excessive length, then they really have to justify that runtime. Silent films even more so, due to the usually slower pace and less frequent editing. And I believe that Haxan, that stands at about 1 hour 45, does outstay its welcome a bit. Personally, I would have preferred if the film explored its core concepts through the lens of a more traditional narrative, instead of constant interposing from a narrator or lecturer to guide us through these experiences. Likely an anthology film to explore witchcraft through the ages. It would have helped add a more timeless quality to the film, but there's obviously a case to be made that this would go against the director's intentions and goals. In its current state, to me, it stands as more of an interesting novelty than an engaging experience throughout the whole picture. This makes sense as the film began life as a straight academic study of witchcraft, a filmic lecture, but halfway through, Christensen, the director, decided that wasn't dramatic enough, so he added reenactments, demons, torture scenes, and surreal imagery. As a result, it does lend a somewhat uneven feel to the picture. Some sections last half an hour, others 10 minutes, and the ending does feel somewhat abrupt. It has a very experimental feel, which you could argue adds a sense of creepiness or otherworldliness to it, like you're uncovering an ancient historical artifact that you can't quite comprehend. I can understand that, but to me, it just feels a little uneven. It's probably because the opening didn't grab me like it does some other people, but there we go. Let's discuss some of the more positive features, as there are a fair few. As mentioned earlier, the visuals are absolutely the standout point of the film. Some of them hold up exceptionally well even today, but even those that don't manage to retain an iconic stature, they really serve to immerse you in this world, whether they be the various demons or the torture chambers and the tools that were used. It even includes scenes and set pieces that I consider to be genuinely disturbing, which I must admit I can't remember feeling about any other silent film. Hand in hand with this goes the high quality acting of everyone involved in the picture. I consider this to be a really underrated quality of the film. Every single performance throughout feeds into the film's overarching oppressive tone. They may not be as standout as some of the top acting performances in contemporary films, but you buy into the seriousness of the narrative, especially impressive given the dark subject matter of many of the scenes and the fact that this is a silent film where exaggerated acting was commonplace. Even though I consider the structure of the film to be a bit uneven, I do believe the overarching tone itself is kept extremely consistent throughout. And I think all of this is owed to the genuine heart of the film. You can tell it was born out of passion and a true fascination with the history. Yes, it may be structurally uneven, but it is distinctly passionate and unique, a rare quality lacking in most films. Overall, given my mostly positive experience, I'm going to rate this a low 4 out of 5 on my silent film rating scale. The qualities that I find exceptional are absolutely some of the best silent cinema has to offer, but I've got to address that structure. 35 minutes is a fair bit of time to not be enjoying yourself, but the remaining picture is so excellent and it has such a historical and cultural influence that I do think it deserves a 4 from me. If the issues I've described don't bother you, then I could easily see someone giving this top marks. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this one to those who are new to silent film, as the structure can be a little bit alienating. Come back to it a bit later when you're more comfortable with the genre. However, silent film fans and even modern film enthusiasts should absolutely give this a watch. I'm certain you'll get something out of the experience. Before we finish, I'll just talk for a bit about the different music available for this film. As Haxan is a fairly popular silent film, it doesn't lack for existing scores, many of which are available on YouTube, which I'll link in the description. Although there's no original score for the film, we do know what existing music was used to accompany the film on its premiere. Gillian B arranged a score using these known pieces, creating the closest approximation of what the music would have sounded like at the time of release. It's mostly classical music based. In my opinion, it's functional, I enjoyed it, but it doesn't closely follow the on-screen actions, instead giving a broad overtone of the film's atmosphere. But is a suitable recommendation for silent film purists. Changing gears completely, Tristan Gianola uses a modern chamber ensemble that fuses classical jazz and experimental textures to instill a strong sense of instability and unease. Personally, I find it a bit hyperbolic, a bit over the top at times, but it'll keep you awake, that's for sure. Not a bad option at all, but not my favourite. Then there's a solo piano score by Lee Knowles. Again, it's fine, has its moments. I feel like solo piano scores for silent film really suffer when they're not done live, just because your toolkit is far more condensed than it is when you have a whole orchestra to play with. The variety of sound you can create is far more vast. But taken on its own, it's effective at what it's going for. The Matti Bye score, included on the Radiance release of the film, is probably my favourite, as I think it best captures the ominous tone of the film, without veering too far into the world of melodrama. It's appropriate atmosphere, even if it lacks a little bit of variety, so there are a few points to me where it feels a little bit stale. As well as this, there's a whole host of other existing scores that I'll link in the description below, but I hope this is a good starting point if you're unfamiliar with the film, or even if you are familiar and you just want to experience it in a different way. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.